The next chapter, chapter number 58, باب النهي عن سب الريح, prohibition of cursing the wind. Cursing the wind. People do these types of things that shows the ignorance that these are creation of Allah. The wind, the time, all of these things has nothing to do on its own. These are the soldiers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the creator of all things. So when people curses the wind and curses the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically they are as if they are cursing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most wise subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as a result of that, that would negate the tawheed or the perfection of the tawheed. So the believers, they see everything happens, they witness. You know, when you witness something, they witness the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of what happens around us. Because nothing happens without the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His power and His knowledge subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the person in ignorance, he would be busy cursing the wind and thinking that the wind and the earth and this and that did that to him, or Mother Nature, all these types of kufr. Everything is by the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. باب النهي عن سب الريح عن أبي بن كعب رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا تسبوا الريح فإذا رأيتم ما تكرهون فقولوا اللهم إنا نسألك من خير هذه الريح وخير ما فيها وخير ما أمرت به ونعوذ بك من شر هذه الريح وشر ما فيها وشر ما أمرت به. This hadith you need it especially in Chicago and anywhere طبعا, of course, because people forget this, because it happens so many times and it becomes norm, so they forget about the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ubay ibn Ka'b said, radiallahu anhu, that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, do not curse the wind. Clear prohibition. If you see that which is displeasing to you, the wind, strong wind, do not say, oh, I love it so much. This is against the nature of the human being. But you see the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do not ask, and this is something that if you read someone from the early generations of Islam or something, you would see his son died and he's so happy that this has happened to him. But this is not what we're ordered to do. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when his son died, the tears came out of the eyes of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So to go against the nature of the human being and to say, oh, I'm very happy that my son died, or you start inviting people for such a great event that happened, this is not the sign of being sabr or grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is human nature, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests the human being, and if he is sad as a result of that, but his sadness does not lead him to protesting the qadar of Allah or to say something that is haram, he's still content and patient and so on. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from his slave. But if he does not have any feelings, right, this is as Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he said, it's like a donkey. I mean, the donkey does not feel anything. But the human being has feelings, but as long as it's done in the proper way. So if you see something that you dislike with regarding to the wind, the Prophet ﷺ said, you say then, Allahumma. See, you call unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to curse the wind. Allahumma inna nas'aluka min khayri hadhihi ar-rih. O Allah, we ask of you the good of this wind and the good of what is in it, and the good that it is commanded to bring along with it. It's commanded. It's a creation of Allah. It has a reason, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded it to do whatever it does. And we seek your protection from the harm of this wind and the evil of what it is in it, and the evil that it is commanded to bring along with it. There are nations destroyed by the wind. And as a punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he would see the clouds, his face will change, alayhi salatu wasalam, concerned. And when he was asked about that, alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, people were punished by these winds. See, this is the remembrance of Allah that is in the nature of the believers, right? And the Prophet ﷺ would make such a dua. So this is a good dua to be said, and it's to be said in Arabic, of course. A person should say it in Arabic. If he does not memorize it like that, at least say something, but till he memorize it. So it's good always to have these types of adhkar to be said at certain times, at certain occasions, and so on, to be among those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala much by following the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So again we see how clear example that is, and how this relates to the Tawheed, to the oneness of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When everything is referred to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when people seek the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of their affairs, good, bad, anything that happens to them, they refer it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, the Prophet ﷺ, after warning and forbidding us from cursing the wind, the Prophet ﷺ directed us to say what is good. And always the believers only say what is good. And that the wind has nothing to do with what it does. It's all the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.